Hello, folks. Welcome back to the Two Stewards Show. My name's Mark. I'm here with Brent.
Hello, Mark.
And we have an extra special guest, not just a special guest, but an extra special guest. His name is Hrvoje Morić, and he is the host of Geopolitics Empire. We've talked about the podcast a few times on our show, but welcome, Hrvoje.
Great to be here. Hello from not sunny today, rainy today, Mexico. So,
yeah, and so Mexico. That's one of the things Brent wanted to talk about. We'll get into that a little bit later. That alternative or dual citizenship and so forth. But
dual or is it? I actually have my passports here. Triple. I've got.
You got a pile of passports sitting there.
American, Croatian, and Mexican. There you go.
Okay, wow. Because your name that's Croatian background, right?
It literally means Croats or Croatian.
Okay. So. Yeah, and you know what? In dual or multiple citizenship has been a growing topic for us here in Canada as things get worse and worse, and people are thinking about moving, and maybe I'll get your take on that later too, right? Do you stay in a culture and try to, as a Christian, do you stay and try to redeem it, or is there a point at which you leave? But okay, first of all, let's just talk about New World Order. So when I hear, and I assume a lot of our listeners, when we hear the New World Order, the eyes glaze over a little bit, and you're just like, oh, okay, here we go, one of these conspiracy guys. But it's hard to deny that conspiracies exist, and there's historical proof of many that, that have happened. And so I don't know. How do you talk to normal people anymore? Like if you're at a dinner party, how do you broach this subject without sounding like, you're a little off your rocker?
I was having dinner with some Mexican, there's some foreigners as well, Italian, American, last night, having some pizza, and the topic slightly came up, and some of the people were what you might be called normie, and then when you see someone is of that very, I call it liberal globalist position, I just sort of change the topic, because it's really not, you're not going to get anywhere, but you'll have times where it opens up. Did you mean my views on the whole New World Order thing, or how to bring it up with people?
Well, I mean, I know your views. I don't know if the listenership knows, but no, I mean, how do you bring that up without, we have to acknowledge there are other forces at play in this world, and not most people, I think, are content to just sort of live their life, and we're in Canada, cost of living has gone up, so you just focus on survival, right? And not so much on all the stuff that's going on out there. So most people don't even either want to know or do know about what's going on sort of outside.
I think I throw out the feelers, like the Bible says, fishers of men. And, for example, we've got a cleaning lady comes in once a week, and she's totally open to this stuff. Like she's, she got the medical countermeasure, we'll say, and then she's like wide awake, and then you put out the feeler. So I think one thing is to put out the feelers to see where people are at, and then I use factual information. Here's an example in Mexico recently, and I think you're familiar probably with this, and your listeners, the 15-minute city, smart city project, yep. United Nations, Great Reset, World Economic Forum, Cobra Commander Klaus Schwab, as I like to call him, and literally in the past 2 or 3 weeks. So you might bring that up, and people might say, like you said, crazy conspiracy theorists. But it was the official Twitter account, X account, of one of the organs of, I forget which part of the Mexican government. They tweeted out an official flyer. Official Mexican government tweeted out they were doing planning. There was a planning event for 15-minute city. And then a mainstream article came out, Mexican newspaper, magazine, said, we're going to divide Mexico City into multiple 15-minute cities. And then the same week, some mayor in the state of Nuevo León, he did a short clip where he's walking through the city, and he's like, we're going to make a 15-minute city. And so it's like, my approach would be, we're so far into this at this point. We're so far into the New World Order now that you don't even have to use questionable, sources. They're coming out into the open now. H.G. Wells talked about this, the open conspiracy. At some point, they have to unveil all of this, and that's, I think, where we're at. And so I would use sources like that. Look, here's the official Twitter account of Mexican government. They're saying we're going into the 15-minute cities, and so I would put feelers out, see where people are, use factual information. If some of the people start to give aggressive pushback, then you'll know that it's not worth really, I think, bringing it up. But then you'll have people that are more open to it, and they'll be like, "Oh yeah, tell me more," and then there's your opportunity.
Hrvoje, if you could, for our listeners, maybe just paint a quick picture of what the New World Order is, because Mark kind of just made a bit of an assumption, I think, that all of our listeners understand. But what exactly? How would you define that?
I always like to do it from a biblical worldview, even when I have non-Christian guests myself. But I just start with the Bible. For me, it's, you read the Bible, and from Old to New Testament, it's implied that there's going to be a world authority at some point. I mean, in some ways there already is. That in this current world, Satan, I say that there's a real entity, Satan. It's a real angel. He's really around. He's flying around the planet with a third of the angels that he took down with him. And he tried to initiate the original regime change in heaven, right? Usurped the throne of God, coup d'etat, and he failed. And in some ways, it's like a false flag operation. He's the originator of false flag operations. But Book of Daniel talks about, if you look at the end of history, you're going to have this sort of empire that takes over the world, Revelation, and all that. And so for me, that is the New World Order. And then I marry sort of what the Bible talks about with real world political science and international relations. So you can put the two together, like facts, science and facts with the Bible. And with that, you have this powerful then formula. And you've seen, particularly over the past few centuries, we've reached a point where technology has enabled the wildest dreams of these people seeking to dominate the planet. And, a lot of it, I think, goes to the British elites. Cecil Rhodes, you had these wealthy British control freaks. A lot of they were eugenicists, Malthusians, and they openly state, like, you read their books, they say they want. Cecil Rhodes said he wants a British world commonwealth, so to create a world state, a democratic, socialist, totalitarian state. And that basically, for me, is the New World Order. They call it today global governance, global government. I've interviewed on my podcast. I managed to get some of the globalists on my podcast, actually. And I had one guy, his name is Andreas Bummel. The second edition of his book was just published, World Parliament. And he's part of this NGO called Democracy Without Borders. And they're attempting to reform the United Nations. They're trying to create something, the UN Parliamentary Assembly. So they're trying to add a component to it, that a people's component to it. Like, it doesn't have like a parliament where people can vote. And so they sort of want to add that onto it. But their express goal is world government, in their own words. And I was at the UN. I worked when I was a graduate student in Geneva at the EU and UN. And so that's sort of my view, is basically New World Order is this attempt for total global domination.
And it's enabled by technology in ways that it never has been before. Okay.
Yeah, we'll talk about the Algorithm Ghetto later. But just more on the New World Order. I mean, there's so much there to unpack. So New World Order, like, this sounds pretty daunting. Do you think there's like one New World Order? Like, my view is kind of that this is a continual thing. Empires rise and fall, and the Roman Empire. I love that you had I can't remember his name on, but the
Jeremy Renslate.
Yeah, but the Roman Empire on that was great. The Roman Empire was a great depiction of sort of a New World Order, because they were, they governed a large part of the world. If you're in that empire, wherever you were, they governed it. And I kind of look at it as there's continual iterations, right? A cyclical history. And like, what are your, so I don't think that necessarily this one is the last one, but maybe it is. Like, what are your thoughts? Are we sort of in the end times, or do we have a long ways to go yet?
I was checking out a bit of your fourth turning episode you guys did not too long ago. Yeah, I got the book right behind me now. How?
Yeah.
And I would agree with you. I think one thing that people miss that are not metaphysical, spiritual Christian is when they look at it from a secular perspective. If you don't have the spiritual dimension, you're missing something. And because they don't account for this entity that's there. All humans die. Rockefellers died, Kissinger died, right? And people think, okay, well, these guys running the ship have died, and now there's some new secret society. But throughout the ages, you've always got the captain of the ship there, Lucifer, right? He doesn't die. He's steering that ship. And I had two conversations in the past one with Canadian pastor Arthur Pawlowski, and if you guys are not familiar with Patrick Wood, he's like the expert on technocracy. He's also a Christian. And I asked them this towards the end of the interview, and I don't know if with both it was after the recording or not, but they both had the same conclusion, and I would agree that basically it's like cycles. I liken it to waves, like in the sea, where you have one wave, it goes up, it goes down. The second wave is even bigger, and then it crashes, and then the third wave is even bigger. And that's how I view this progression towards the end of history, where you, like you said, you had like the Babylonian Empire, that grew and then collapsed. And then you had the Roman Empire, that was even bigger, and then it collapsed. And then you had the Holy Roman Empire, right? And then you have the European empires, the Dutch, Spanish, British Empire, which was even bigger, right? And then that sort of collapses. And now you've got the American Empire, which is the biggest. Where have you seen in the history of the world where you have literally 1,000 military bases across the planet? They control the financial system. We saw what happened during the 2020s, where all countries were shut down. I had a guest, this famous Swiss millionaire investor, Mark Faber, who lives in Thailand. And during our interview in the 2020s, he said, from a secular perspective, he also studies history. He said, this is unprecedented, what happens, during COVID. And so I view it as these waves. And then Pawlowski and Patrick Wood agreed that this could very well be the end. I have the same position. We could be in the end times, and or it could just be, it could be staved off for another generation or two. And so I'm not, sitting at home waiting for the end.
I think it's got to be going on for some more time yet, because your podcast's still not over yet. You still got lots to talk about.
But I do hold to an interesting thesis. There's a fascinating YouTube channel called Messiah 2030. And I've actually had this idea before I came to this channel, and others have talked about it, that I could see the earliest, the 2030s, being the return of Christ, because I believe, like, I'm a huge fan of Ken Ham, Answers in Genesis, that it's a literal 6-day creation, and that it's 6,000 years, young earth creationist. I have no shame in that. And that by the 2030s, that could be like the completion of the 6,000 years, if you think the 30 or so years after the death of Christ. And I could see that as, and then why are they obsessed with the 2030s? The globalists are obsessed with having their world government in place by the 2030s. Now they're starting to talk about UFOs and aliens, which I think is that's a whole other topic, but I think that's sort of the deception, and so I could see that as the earliest sort of end of the world. But it's, again, I think we're not supposed to set dates, and I'm thinking of having another baby, even if it might be the end of the world. And so I think that's how Christians should just carry on living, right?
Yeah.
I think that's an important something important to remember, right? The day of the Lord will come like a thief in the night. Nobody will know. So when you think that probably means it's not going to be then. So, what's the response? And I think we've kind of come to the conclusion that you build a household, and that's the best thing you can do in this chaotic world. And, not everybody can do that, but as much as possible, do that. have babies. So yeah, come on, Hrvoje, have some more babies. And
Hrvoje, you see a spiritual dimension to this, right? Because you have Christian faith, but some of these, I think you call them liberal globalists, people on the other side who are kind of promoting a new world order or involved in it. What is their perspective like, do you think? And I know you've probably only interviewed a handful of them, but you can maybe make some suppositions. Like, do they have a spiritual dimension to what they're doing, or like where do they place their trust? Is it all in man?
I'd have to speculate somewhat, but I think it's a mix. So, I mean, here's an interesting story. I was in Geneva. I studied my master's at the Geneva School of Diplomacy, 2008, 2009. And I don't know if you guys have heard of Lutz's Trust. I may have brought it up. So, no. And again, this is what we were talking about earlier. Some people might roll their eyes at this, but again, I'm coming at this from a factual perspective. It's credible, authoritative. People can look everything up for themselves. And so there's this organization. A little bit of the backstory. You had someone called Elena Blavatsky in the 1800s, and she basically pushed something called theosophy. She had a magazine called Lucifer. In 1922, I guess one of her adepts or disciples, Alice Bailey, founded what was originally officially founded as Lucifer Publishing in 1922. They changed their name to Lutz's Trust. They have 3 offices, New York, London, and Geneva. And if you go to they are an NGO that is officially affiliated with the United Nations. And I believe the United Nations Meditation Room in New York is managed by Lutz's Trust. And if you go to their website, I subscribe to their newsletter. And their literature, they themselves say, so this is a UN NGO. It's part of the ECOSOC, I think, Council. They believe Lucifer is the Christ, that Lucifer is the Prometheus, right? And that they've said in their own literature that he's going to be the Mahdi to the Muslims, the Christ to the Christians, the Maitreya to the Eastern religionists, and so forth. And they say in their own literature that this Lucifer figure is here now, and that they use the term cycle of conferences, that all these United Nations conferences, World Economic Forum conferences, are merely preparations for the unveiling of this Christ figure. And it's like, in the Christian worldview, that's like, well, that's Antichrist, you know? Yeah. And so I went to one of their meetings in 2009 because I was in Geneva, and it was just a few minutes walk from my school in Geneva, which was near the UN building. And you see crazy things like the microphone. It was a conference room where their offices are, and I've got photos. You go to the conference room, there's like 200 microphones, and they're all pyramids. And you press the button, and the little capstone turns red, and you talk into the pyramid. The coffee lounge at the old League of Nations building, the UN Geneva, it's literally called the Serpentine Lounge, and you see all this symbolism there. And so that was a bit of my experience. And so I would say that some of the elite, they have to be occultists. There's a great guy called Mark Passio. He used to be an occultist. He used to be in some satanic secret society. He left. He's not a Christian. He still, I think, subscribes to some Gnostic ideas, but he did a great 8-hour lecture recently on, he uses the term occultocracy. And that's, for me, my favorite, because even though he's not a Christian, I can merge his authoritative perspective with my biblical, where I think we're run by an occultocracy. Again, Satan and these angels, evil fallen angels, are behind it. But the human dimension is, you've got this occultocracy that's managing the planet. And he says it includes many factions. It's not just one group. People talk about the Jews run the world. I don't believe that, but you have a Zionist faction or lobby. You have the Jesuits. You've got Freemasonry, right? You've got Bilderberg. And so I think some of the elites, they are occultists. They probably do, seances and rituals and things like that. And then you've got another lower level group of people. They're very narcissistic. When I was in Geneva, a lot of the people were opportunists, super narcissistic, fame and fortune. That's what drove them. They're yes men. And so I think you also have these people that will do whatever you tell them to do, to have money, to have prestige, to have status, and they are the useful idiots. They're none the wiser. And so I think it's a mix of people who intentionally know what's going on, which is a smaller percentage, and a greater mass of people who are just useful idiots. Like they literally have no idea what's going on. But
so you got the pigs and then the rest of the farm animals kind of thing.
Exactly. That's exactly it. And, when I was in Geneva, some of the higher up folks around me, a few of them, and that was just an example, they'd be quoting H.G. Wells. Like, you understand that these people know what's going on. I mean, and I was chided in Geneva for talking too much about the New World Order. We are the president of the university. I mean, nice guy, but he gave us a lecture once. He said, some of you guys are talking too much about this New World Order. He literally said, it's that trick that they play on us. They gaslight us, where he's like, there's no New World Order. It's a conspiracy theory. And then like a few minutes later in his lecture, he's like, yeah, there is a world government and it's a good thing. And it's coming, and it's just like, so it doesn't exist if you're a critic of it, but it does exist and it's wonderful, and so.
So you mentioned theosophy, and the first time I heard that word, I'm like, oh, somebody just made up a word. Like, come on. But, realizing that this goes back to at least 18th century, and I think this is, it's a bit of a trap for Christians as well, right? Especially those who are maybe a little more peripheral. We hear about Christ consciousness. I brought that up before, right? And that's, Christ is in all of us. And that's, that's something nice you can kind of want to believe. And we see the rise of like the prosperity gospel in America and Canada as well. I don't know if you can expound a little bit more on sort of the roots of theosophy, and then how that manifests in our culture, and especially, for Christians who are not aware of what's going on.
I recently did an episode with a young Canadian Christian. Maybe you guys can get him on. His name is Terry Wolf. He's a Mennonite in Manitoba. And I felt compelled to begin discussing this because you're starting to see in alternative media, independent media podcasting space, what we were discussing earlier was the top-down globalists, right? And now you're supposed to have the bottom-up grassroots alternative media that's supposed to be anti-globalist, right? But now, I go to some of the conferences, of alternative media conferences, and you're just blown away by how infested they are with New Age, theosophy, Gnosticism. Like, they're literally, at some of the conferences, they quote Aleister Crowley, Satanist. They talk about oneism. By the way, one of my favorite sources on that is Dr. Peter Jones of Truth Exchange. He's Christian. He just stepped down, but he talks about oneism. And this Christ consciousness is anything but Christ. So what they believe, these people who talk about oneism and Christ consciousness, they talk about your inner trauma and shadow work. And basically, when I listen to them, Peter Jones says, we live in a dualist world, creator and creation, right? But oneism says everything is one. You and I are one. We are gods. It's the same lie that Satan said in the Garden of Eden. And when they talk about Christ consciousness, they say, you are God. Seek your inner consciousness. They talk about do the shadow work to heal your trauma. That's like replacement for sin. We are sinners. We can't do anything about it. We need the external force, Christ, to take away our sins. But they've created like a copy where, no. You can heal your own trauma, sin. And they always use the term, like the David Icks of the world and others say, remember who you are. You'll see this a lot in alternative media. They say, and people just parrot it. People who like worship, idolize David Icke and all these big alternative media figures, they'll say, remember who you are. And it's like, who are we? And they don't tell you that yet. They say, oh, you are God, right? And it's like, can we get better psyops? This is the same thing for like 5,000 years. Like Satan said this in the beginning. And so you're seeing now this growing Gnosticism. This is another thing now. You're seeing, you're probably aware, we can discuss, I believe what the state of Israel is doing is incorrect. in Palestine and Gaza, I'm not giving a blank check to them. But at the same on the there's extremes where you're seeing this very angry hate towards Jews now growing, which I think is also prophecy. I think towards the last days it says people will come to hate and be bothered by Israel more and more. But you're seeing now this growth of Gnosticism where so many people are saying the Old Testament is false, Yahweh is Satan. They're saying the God of the Old Testament is Satan, and that's Gnosticism. That's because Gnosticism believes that we live under the demiurge. So this God of this God that controls, he's got this prison planet or matrix, and so I went into that on one podcast where a lot of trutherism or conspiracy theory now is rooted in Gnosticism, and we have to be very discerning and very careful with what we're consuming, especially Christians. And I've started to take a little step back away from a lot of the conspiracy culture because you're seeing it from Alex Jones to a lot of the people who with the COVID stuff, like the Mickey Willis of Plandemic documentary. They're all using this language, frequencies and Christ consciousness, and it's just like, whoa, what's going on here?
Yeah, it's amazing. You hear it's a little bit coordinated, right? Because I never heard Christ consciousness before, and this sun gazing stuff and all this stuff. I mean,
even Candace Owens, she's talking about Christ consciousness.
Yeah, it's incredible. And a lot of what you're talking about really sounds like Scientology as well, right? You got to do the work to get to a higher level and cleanse the shadow work and all that stuff. So it's interesting that it's coming out. So I think there's a warning there too, right? Like you talk about conspiracy theory, and then some people eventually like, okay, there are conspiracies, and then they just dive in and like without any sort of discernment, and then you end up on the other side of this, like worshiping, maybe it's Gaia worship or maybe it's self worship, and that appeals to people, right? Because I'm a god. I don't actually have responsibility for the bad stuff, but I can transcend. So, that's okay. That's theosophy. So that's good. Maybe we'd talk about the algorithm ghetto for a second before I get into a few other things. But you use this term all the time, the algorithm ghetto. So this, I think this refers to the prevalence of technology in the use of governments to control the populace. But maybe you can, expound on that a little bit.
I would direct people, they can go back to my interview in June of 2020, in May, during COVID 1984, as I call it. From the beginning, I saw right through, I went back in January 2020. I had been the first to interview Dr. Francis Boyle, who's the author of the Bioweapons Act that was signed into law in 1989. And I was the first to get his opinion on COVID. And that was my biggest interview ever, 300,000 views on YouTube. Then they deleted it, and then it got reposted, I think, seen millions of times. And then the next day, my face is on the cover of a front page of InfoWars, and then Alex Jones is doing a play-by-play. And one of the things I asked Boyle was, could they use, the events of 2020 to bring in a police state? And he's like, yes. They tried that in 2001 with the anthrax attacks. So they always use as a pretext these biological events, which they themselves create to get rid of civil liberties. And so I was seeing immediately through all of this, and I asked to get on the renowned Jewish historian, Edwin Black. Edwin Black has written the books on IBM and the Holocaust, how IBM created the first paper computer for the Nazi German government, which was used then to classify the populace, so they could see, who is of what ethnicity, political views, whatever views, so everyone can be classified like cattle on a farm. And this goes back to, I think, what we were talking about earlier, that these ideas have been around for so long, and technology is now, we're reaching a point of centralization of power and monopolization of technology that's now really enabling the powers that be to achieve this world domination. So the term that I use is my favorite. That's Edwin Black's term. And it's a 25-minute interview. I highly recommend it. And he says we are headed for this algorithm ghetto. People call it the social credit system, digital gulag, cyber gulag, electronic concentration camp. And basically, he says what is being built now it's like ghettos, basically. So Jews were put into these analog, physical, walled-off ghettos, right? That's what they're doing with us. So now they're creating these digital algorithm ghettos. The 15-minute city is the best example. I was thinking of this the other day. They don't have enough prisons to put us all in globally. So they're bringing the prisons to us. And so with this 15-minute city, smart city project, it's also called Resilient City. I actually live in the Resilient City here in Guadalajara in Mexico. So their goal is to, you hear them talking about, you won't have to leave where you live. Everything will be at around 15 minutes walk from where you live. They're getting rid of car lanes. They're trying to get rid of our cars, so no freedom of mobility. The goal is to remove cash. Edwin Black talks about that, cashless society. And you'll have your workplace close to you, or you'll work online. You'll have a supermarket near to you, your school near to you, or your kids will just go on. In Australia, the news this week, they said the University, I think, of Adelaide, if I'm not mistaken, they're not going to have any physical, you're not going to go to school anymore. Everything's going to be online. We foresaw this coming. So no more physical spaces. Everything's going to be online. And so,
but you still have to pay for going to university.
That exactly. One of the newscasters was actually talking about that. He's like, why do we have to give them so much money then if everything's online? And so this algorithm ghetto, the idea is there's not going to be cash. Everything's going to be online. You're going to have a digital ID. So basically the core requirements of everyone will be forced to have a smartphone. You'll be forced to have a digital ID. And to carry out any public or private activity, you'll have to do it with your phone and digital ID and biometrics and everything. And so then danger becomes then, like, for example, if you leave your 15-minute city and you go to another city or state, because of geolocation and geofencing, you may not be able to spend money, because if there's no cash and everything's digital, they can sense that you're out of range. And like if I travel to another state, if I travel to America, I can't make any payments. Or if you're a dissident, right? If you commit thought crime, they can just turn you off. And Edwin Black says they can make you a non-entity, a zombie. And you literally wouldn't be able to buy, he says, bread or milk or food. And your neighbor wouldn't help you, because if your neighbor helps you, they'll be thrown into the algorithm ghetto. So there'd be no point for them helping you either. And that's a perfect setup for like the mark of the beast system. And, this goes back to earlier, Patrick Wood and Pawlowski, that I think, and Jeremy Ryan Slade, I brought it up. I was shocked to discover, the Romans in Roman Empire, you had, I think it was called the libel, this certificate where you were forced to have this certificate. You had to offer pagan sacrifice. And if you didn't do that, you'd get fined or jailed. During the Holy Roman Empire, the Catholic Church also had something, I lost the primary source, but I actually read it, and it said, if you don't fully believe what the Catholic Church says, you won't be able to buy or sell. And so you see this throughout history, this rhyme, but now it's coming to a point where I think they're going to be able to fully, implement this sort of system. And for me, that's the algorithm ghetto. It's the most dangerous, because I've been deplatformed off of PayPal 2 years ago. The Department of Homeland Security, like this, I still can't believe. My own government, the Department of Homeland Security, I call it also Deutschland Security. It's like the Stasi. And they banned me from PayPal in April of 2022. I was taken off of Patreon. People are having bank accounts shut now. Nigel Farage in Canada, people are well aware. And so this is just the beginning. If you just extrapolate, you can see where we are headed. And then you won't be able to travel, to work, to bank. Nick Vujicic, there's some good news. The Serbian-Australian evangelist, Nick Vujicic, the man without limbs. I saw him speak here in Guadalajara many years ago. He's about to create the pro-life bank. It's going to have one physical branch in Texas, and then it's going to be fintech online. So I think anyone around the world can open an account. And he's trying to make a bank that's not that where they won't cancel you. So maybe us Christians will be able to continue living using Nick Vujicic's pro-life bank. And I guess, that's the gist of the algorithm ghetto. And for me, it's imminent, because you're seeing in Mexico, Russia's implementing, all countries are implementing this stuff, and they can just shut you off at any moment.
Is there a little bit of a race between countries too? Like if one country locks down their population before another one and has more control, like they have an advantage to a certain degree? I think there's some truth. Well, Edwin Black says that it's going to be like a fire that burns all over the planet, and it'll burn at different speeds, as the fire spreads. And he says, obviously, the developed countries will get there first, like USA, Europe, and China, and then places. That's one thing that happened to me during COVID. I was in Kazakhstan, teaching with my family, and my goal after Kazakhstan was to go to Croatia and live in my parents' home near the beach, And after COVID 1984, I'm like, no, we're going back to Mexico because there's more freedom. For now, all I'm doing is buying time, so I'm not, under any illusion that, look, I said they're deploying 15-minute cities in Mexico. Europe is the prototype for all of this. I've said for 20 years, Europe is the blueprint. It's the prototype for technocratic world government. And you're seeing that model being exported because no one has pointed this out. Here's a little, fun prophecy thing. If you look at the book of Daniel, you have the dream, right? And the image of the body, the gold and the silver and the bronze and the iron and the clay and the 10 toes. And you hear the talk of 10 kingdoms. I have right behind me an official book from 1970 from the Club of Rome. And they have a map where their goal is to divide the world into 10 regions. And the first iteration was European Union. And now you have something called African Union. This already exists. You have the Eurasian Union, spearheaded by Putin. You've got the Union of Southeast Asian States. And the North American Union, I've interviewed the father of the North American Union, Robert Pastor. I've met him. He would come to the university here. And you have the current outgoing president of Mexico literally said, we need to copy the EU and integrate Canada, USA, and Mexico. Then you had Nayib Bukele. I know you Bitcoiners, but Bukele, he gave an interview a year or two ago. Again, I only use mainstream sources, factual sources. He said, we need to copy the EU and create a Central American Union. And then you had the former president of Ecuador, Rafael Correa, in an interview a year or two ago. I have got the source. He said, we need to copy the EU and create a South American Union. So, you can really see the big picture of what's going on. That's a little bit off topic from the algorithm ghetto, but yeah, I think China is, and you've heard Putin say in the past, the countries that get to AI first will have the, what do you call it, like that advantage, when you're there first. And so everyone is racing really to get the CBDCs and digital IDs and all that.
Interesting. So we both have Dutch backgrounds actually. So for myself anyways, I follow Holland a little bit and goings on there. So, like the European Union. So we've seen a bit of populism or right wing, the rise of the right in, specifically the European Union. Geert Wilders, although he was not able to become prime minister, just the fact that he was elected is a surprise. So I guess, what do you think about this prototype, the European Union? Can it last? And then is there a chance for people to use technology themselves to combat the use of technology by the government? So you mentioned Nayib Bukele, and it was disappointing to hear his South America or Central American Union talk, but the idea of Bitcoin, and I know there's differing thoughts on that, but you could look at Bitcoin as as long as the government isn't as DARPA is not in behind it. Is this an example of how individuals can use technology to escape or to fight back against the algorithm ghetto. And, could this happen in Europe? Is the European Union going to fall, or is the populism right wing just another side of the same coin? And they're also going to be power hungry and, want to centralize power.
I view a lot of the populism in Europe as toothless. It used to be years back, people thought, Meloni in Italy and all these, Brexit. And now you look, she's been absorbed by the blob. I've interviewed, I forget who I've interviewed. You mentioned Netherlands. I've interviewed Thierry Baudet, the famous, forget his political party, that made national and international news. So he was making a joke about the space lizards, and that was all over national Dutch media, and even Le Monde, the French, like New York Times, Le Monde mentioned my podcast and my interview with Thierry Baudet. And I don't know if it was him that saying or someone else that they viewed Meloni as like she's been absorbed by the blob, and so I don't really see any real opposition. I look at my Croatia, and it's just we're a total vassal state. All of our political leaders are European yes men. They're apparatchiks, and so I don't really see any. I'm kind of doom pilled in that sense. From a material perspective, I'm black pilled, cyanide pilled, doom pilled, reality pilled. But people in alt media who criticize me, they reject my white pill. I'm happy, I'm positive, I'm forward thinking because my white pill is Jesus Christ and God. But the alt media, they hate Christ, they hate God, and they're like, "Oh, you're black pilled." And I'm like, "No, I'm white pilled. Jesus is going to save us." No, you're black pilled. It's just like, no, Jesus. And so it's this argument, and so there's a fascinating report. For the life of me, I lost it. I've got too many bookmarks, and there was a report. I think it's incumbent important on people to be reading a lot of these globalist think tank reports, and you'll see a lot of what they're planning. They discuss in these reports. You saw with the Rockefeller lockstep document in 2010. And so there was a report that discussed the EU collapsing in the 2030, like 2030, 2035. So I could see that. I hope it does collapse. I'm an EU citizen, and I hope that it does fall apart. But I don't know. So it could collapse. They could also use that to reform a better version, build back better. So I could see that happening because their strategy is always they prototype something, they try to build Babylon, it doesn't work, and then they come back stronger. You saw World War I, League of Nations. There were not too many takers with League of Nations. World War II, United Nations. So you could see a similar strategy with the EU where maybe they see it's not feasible, it's cracking. Maybe we'll have a war again now. The EU will disintegrate and they'll create a new version, or they'll just modify the current version. And what you say about technology, yes, I think we have to. I have this guerrilla guerrilla, as it's said in Spanish. And I'm not a communist, but I use this term. You during the Cold War, you had these guerrillas, right, in Africa and Latin America fighting against the empire. And if there's an AK-47 lying around, they're going to grab it. Or if there's an American machine gun, they're going to grab it. You're going to use whatever you can get. And that's sort of my mindset where I've got a de-Googled phone. I need to install Linux on my computer. I'm going to be doing that soon. If there's crypto, use it. I'm big on gold and silver, and just use. I think, we have to use whatever we can. And I've got some guests. There's a great Christian German scientist I've had on called Jobst Landgrip. You guys maybe should have him on. He's coming back. His book is fantastic on AI. He's fully convinced that this technological dystopia simply will not be feasible, which is good news. And I've talked to Joe Allen, who's got another fantastic book. He's got a show. He does a segment on Steve Bannon's War Room, and he's kind of slightly in that camp where he says we'll end up with. You've seen the film Idiocracy?
I haven't seen it.
So, I've seen parts of it. Yeah.
Yeah, but it projects a future America where everyone has just been so dumbed down. So I think if we do get a dystopia, at best it'll be like a idiocracy version of dystopia, like a half functioning dystopia. And so I think that will give us some room to maneuver and to use technology to. Yeah, in many ways, yeah.
It doesn't sound like a new world order. It sounds like a new world chaos. I don't, like, not very orderly. And
I hope
who's in
so.
charge?
So, yeah, speaking of chaos, I just came across this Cloward Piven strategy. I don't know if you've heard of that. It's new to me anyways, but a lot of this is a little bit new to me. And, the idea that if you want to destroy capitalism, I think you progressively make things worse and worse via, unbridled immigration and bad economic policies and all this kind of thing. And I don't believe that, I'm looking at Canada, specifically in the US, right? And we're seeing like we both have kind of unbridled immigration, to the point where we're like, why? What is the argument for in Canada anyways is that we need more people to increase GDP. And that's been proven to be like, I don't believe the premise of the argument, but even if that was true, it didn't happen. We're worse off than we were 10 years ago. So, I don't know if this is witting or unwitting, but like, do you think that's behind the scenes, or is it up front? Or is this just people, are we in an idiocracy? And that's what it seems like to me in Canada. We just make such, I don't know if it's malice or incompetence. And it's hard to say.
I view, for the longest time, I think it's malice. It's sinister intent. And that's the most difficult thing for normies, for people to wrap their heads around. And I think we have an advantage, as Christians, or anyone who's spiritual. You have that sort of extra dimension to understand the nature of evil, and we're not as afraid to stare evil in the face, right? Because we have Christ. And so really our leaders are sinister, malicious, and this is all intentional. Again, you can just it's in their own writings. You have Peter Sutherland. He was a member of the Bilderberg meetings, UN, migration, and all that. If you just type in like BBC, Peter Sutherland, you'll find an article from a decade or two ago where he's asked the question, and he says, yes, we should flood Europe with different nationalities to get rid of, homogeneity, to just mix everything up. Like, he's admitting it. They literally said, like, we need to do away with nation states because, again, none of this is new. It's Nimrod. It's the Tower of Babel project. It's a Babylon, a total multicultural system. And I speak as someone who's multicultural. I showed you 3 passports, right? But that's the project, and that's what's happening in Canada, USA, and you're just seeing this. As you said, it's insane. The flood of people, Chinese, Turks, Arabs, Latin America, flooding in to the United States. There was a great video this week of a guy, Nick Johnson, I think is his name. He was on the boots on the ground, Springfield, Ohio. The American government brought in like 20,000 Haitians into one small town. None of that makes sense, and it's not. Look, no one can tell me anything. I'm Mexican, so if you're racist. If anyone, when they tried last year, they tried to attack me on Twitter. And this was a journalist who was Canada Vice journalist, and he worked for some Canada NGO, and he was being financed by the Canadian government, attacking me, trying to call me, because I interviewed everyone. So they tried to, because I interviewed this guy, he's trying to associate me with neo-Nazi, fascist, white supremacist, anti-Semite. And I'm like, whoa. And I just was aggressively quote tweeting, and they left me alone because I said, first, my Croatian grandfather, was a prisoner of the Croatian Nazi regime. He survived. But second of all, I'm a Slav, ethnically. Slavs are Untermensch. Slavs the Nazis would use us as slave labor, exterminate us. Plus, I'm a Mexican now. I married a brown Mexican and became a Mexican national. That's twice Untermensch. Just like, how could I be a white supremacist? And they're like, okay, yeah, we can't get him on this, and then they go back to the drawing board. They call me Russian agent. A few months ago, a spook website did an article calling me a Russian agent. And I think you saw the news recently, Tenet Media What's the guy's name? Tim Pool, this whole Russian agent thing. And so I think I was even in a way caught up in that, but I'm going off track. Where were we about the Cloward and Piven? Yeah, it's done intentionally to, as you said, overwhelm the welfare system, get rid of the middle class. It's neo-feudalism. So get rid of the middle class. So we only have the rich and the poor, and to do away with the American way of life. So we could get world government. It's the same model of what the EU is the model, and that's what's being done. And I think ultimately the goal is North American Union, because what they're doing is mixing up. Isn't it interesting how Mexico was left open during COVID, which forced many Canadians and Americans to flood into Mexico, while many are, South American, Latin Americans are going up now to Canada and US. So it's almost like they're intentionally mixing it up. The next World Cup is going to be held where? In North America, in USA, Canada, and Mexico, not in one country. That is also part of the strategy to culturally acclimate us. When Robert Pastor visited us at the Tec de Monterrey, where I used to teach, it's like the MIT of Mexico. It's like the Ivy Leagues of Mexico. He would give lectures, and you'd have international exchange students, Canadians, Americans, and Mexicans. He'd come and he'd say, how many Americans I have? How many Canadian students are here? How many Mexicans? He'd say, you're not Canadian, you're not Mexican, you're not American. You are all North Americans. So it's a political agenda, the USMCA, NAFTA, economic, right? And cultural. They have to get people having this idea that we are not our national identity anymore. We are North American. And so you've got World Cup, you've got
That's
the migration. And so, yeah.
My son, so we got him this birthday present. It's a globe, and then it's got a little stylus, right? And he can touch the different areas on the world and get information. I'm just picturing, the same gift maybe in 5 years, just being like North America. The World Cup was held here in 2020, whatever, and then you got maybe 5 different options you can click. I don't know if that's where we're going.
What can an individual do, Hrvoje? Like, should I run for office? And I know what you think about voting in the political establishment, but should I run for office and try to change things? Should I move? Should I stay? Just on a purely secular level, not even a Christian level. Like, what? I kind of can guess your answer because you live in Mexico. But and we've been like my family, we have been thinking about, like, do we want to stay in Canada? Do we want to go somewhere else? Like, where is that? And I know I think you're speaking at the Expat Money Conference, and so there's a growing movement of people who are thinking about getting out of North America. But you're in Mexico, so really that's part of North America anyways, right?
Yeah, I'm still in the North American Union, so I haven't escaped. Southern Command, Southcom has designated Mexico's part of under their command. So I would just say live life. Continue living life normally. I think that's the best. Not to freak out. Just continue living life as best as you can, and just follow your gut. And for some people, it'll mean staying where you are. Like if someone wants to run, if you got that gut feeling, like you follow your passion, your energy, of course, think about it, think it out. But if you want to run for local political office, do it, do it. We need good people. Like you said, I'm not into that. But if someone is, I feel like, just live your life. If you want to do, politics, do it. If you want to do something else, homesteading or farming or homeschooling or whatever, we need good men and women everywhere. And so, I'm not going to say do what makes sense and that feels good for you, that you have this urge to do it. And relocating, again, it's the same thing. If you really have this feeling, and that's what's driven me for many years. I came to Mexico way before all of this. I came in 2010 to Mexico and just ended up staying. But I've lived in Mongolia, Kazakhstan, Croatia, Switzerland, United States. I've been to Canada. I spent a month in Toronto, Mississauga, and a month in Quebec. And so I would say, I had a Canadian listener some years back, and I think they had a farm somewhere in Canada, and they were, I think one of the spouses was teaching, and the other was, dealing with the farm and selling some of the products. And, a lot of people were looking to Russia. It's more conservative, right? Russia's becoming open to foreigners. Even if you go to the Far East, I think in Siberia, they give you a free plot of land. And if you live there and do something with it, you can then get citizenship. And they were asking me, like, should I leave Canada and go to Russia? And I'm like thinking in my head, well, do you have any Slavic background? I'm Slavic. Croatian is very similar to Russian. And so I already speak 50% like Russian. So if you don't have any Slavic background, that's not a good thing. If you don't know anyone in Russia, in that person's case, I recommended better you just stay in Canada. And so I think it makes sense to stay. And for some people, it makes sense to go somewhere else. And it'll be different for different people, different variables, your age, if you have children, your financial abilities, your, language abilities, your willingness, agility to integrate with other cultures. I've always been the type of person where I went to Mongolia in 6 months. I was intermediate in Mongolian. I was living in a yurt, in minus 30, minus 40 degree weather. I can just drop me off anywhere and I'm awesome. I'm integrating with the local culture. Some people are not like that, and so, yeah.
That's so I'm just thinking about what Peter writes in 1 Peter, and he's talking to the early church, right, in his book, and they're all dispersed amongst different nations. I don't know, maybe it's a similar situation to what's going to be happening now with Christians, kind of getting dispersed throughout the world. But he calls them exiles, which I think adds this spiritual dimension to it, right? It's not just that they're exiles, in the physical sense in this world, but yeah, because of their faith, they are not. They don't call this place home. They don't call this world home. And I think for us and for our listeners, like who have faith, we can confidently say, right, like no matter where we go here, we're not going to find a place that is truly our home. Because we are exiles in this world. That's what we're called, right?
Yeah, that is a great point, which adds to the idea of, for some people, what's the point of moving? Like I've come to the conclusion, I'm just tired and I don't feel like going anywhere anymore. Like my last stand, it's my Mexican last stand. I was a big fan of the spaghetti westerns, Clint Eastwood movies. And like, whatever, I'm here. We got the cartels, we got the 15-minute cities, whatever, I'm just tired. And it's like you said, from a Christian worldview, whatever's going to happen, we're all going to die at the end of the day. A lot of these alternative media people who are creating parallel systems and societies, and it's like, okay, great. You're going to have your little enclave anti-globalist. You're still going to die. Have you, fixed that equation? What are you going to do when you die? Yeah. And so no one's thinking about that. And the most important, I have my, the acronym, the basic instructions before leaving Earth Bible, right? And so securing your faith with Christ, Ray Comfort of Living Waters talks about you're on the plane and you have the parachute. Jesus is the parachute. And then you can jump out of the plane. And you mentioned exiles. I've lived in Kazakhstan and I was in a local church there in Kazakhstan, and in Croatia, 5 minutes from our home there's a good church. And so in Mongolia, it was the craziest story. In 2006, I was sent off to the Gobi in this tiny village, literally in the middle of nowhere, like 500 people in the village, hundreds of miles from anything, other villages. And it's mostly 90% like shaman Buddhist country. And this was when I was just sort of becoming Christian. Not quite yet there, like 1 foot in. And what were the chances that in that village there was a Baptist Christian church? Wow. And it was just like, wow. It's like anywhere you go, you go to the middle of nowhere, Mongolia, bam, there's believers. You go to Kazakhstan, it's like Christians in Mexico telling me like, don't go to Kazakhstan. You don't know if there's a church there. And I'm like, what are you guys talking about? And I get there and that church has been around for a century. My church in Mexico has been around for a decade. It's like, they're all over the place, And so there's believers all over, literally all over the planet.
Yeah, I mean, wherever we are, we tell people about Jesus, right? Like that's the mission, I think. But we want to be stewardly with the gifts we've been given while we're doing that. So, I have so many more topics and things written down, Hrvoje, but we should probably start wrapping this up. We'd be here all day. It'll be another 8-hour lecture. Where can people find you? Where can they listen to you, get your content, etc.?
You said you're full-time doing the podcast.
For now, we'll see how it goes. Yeah. It's paying the bills. It's not quite what I was getting previously as a professional. And so it's an experiment, and I'm going to see if I can get there. And it's fun. I like working. I can get up whenever I like and work when I want. But geopoliticsandempire.com is the website. And then the Substack is doing well. geopoliticsandempire.substack.com. And then people can donate or become a paid subscriber where once a week or every week or two, I do a group Zoom chat with subscribers where we just discuss current events. It's kind of like group therapy, sort of, conspiracy therapy. And then I'll bring back sometimes past podcast guests to do a live Q&A with them, with subscribers. And then I do a weekly I'm a news junkie, and so I'll collect what I think is the most important news of the week. And I'll put that for paid subscribers, the short list. And then I'll do a brief, like 1-page or 2-page commentary. And so that's if you just scan the list of headlines for 2 minutes, you'll immediately have a picture of what transpired during the week. And then I'm active on the Telegram channel. We got 13,000 there, and then X, Twitter, and so forth.
Okay, well, we'll link to some of that stuff in the show notes for sure. Ooh.
Yeah. Okay. Any final parting wisdom for our listeners, or anything we didn't touch on that you thought maybe we should have?
We covered a lot. I would just emphasize, staying sane. Some people get afraid, and how many times did Jesus say? The Bible says, "Don't be afraid." And I'm not afraid. We shouldn't be, regardless of whatever comes. And I look to past believers like Dietrich Bonhoeffer, Richard Wurmbrand, founder of Voice of the Martyrs, the things that they went to. You mentioned Paul. He was content with when he was rich or when he was poor. And, even in my own life, I walked the halls of power, United Nations. I've lived in a tent in the desert, and I loved both. And I was content in either. I've dined with wealthy folks or with the poorest of the poor. And it's just, what an experience. And we shouldn't let any of this stuff get to us. No matter how bad it gets in Canada with whatever, the bugs they're going to throw at us, the lockdowns, they can never take, from what's the freedom that's inside of us. And so we should just live life, be content, and, don't worry that the 5G is going to fry your brain, or, just live life, be happy, and, find meaning and try to help other people. That also gives a lot of meaning, and we want to be charitable and yeah.
Thanks, Hrvoje.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much for being on, sir. So you can check him out at Geopolitics and Empire. And we'll wrap it up. So thanks for listening, folks. And until next time,
steward your wealth wisely. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Two Stewards Show. If you like my voice better, click subscribe.
And if you like my voice better, click share.
If you like both, give us a 5-star rating.
To interact with the show, feel free to reach out at hello@twostewards.ca.
We'll see you in the next episode. In the meantime, steward your wealth wisely.